My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask pardon for my sins and the grace to make these moments of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. As we listen to the Gospel in today's Mass, it will be easy to think that the Church has got a bit confused and forgotten that, in fact, we're in the middle of Lent. Instead of hearing about something like last Sunday, when we heard the story about Jesus fasting for 40 days in the desert, today we listen to the story of the Transfiguration. And what's that got to do with Lent? Well, to find out, let's listen to what happens. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Now, Jesus, I think we'd all be quite keen to be there and experience your transfiguration firsthand. That's probably a bit different to how we feel about Lent, and I guess that's why it seems out of place. I mean, you've got to admit, seeing you transfigured in glory is a pretty different experience to the idea of 40 days of fasting and penance. You see, I think for most of us, we still forget the idea that Lent is really supposed to be to bring us closer to you. We just get dominated by the cost. We go all too easily to you by the simplest means, and, well, look, we're reluctant about using the best means. That's kind of typical of our generation. Being there for the Transfiguration seems a bit like watching an epic movie. You can just enjoy the awesomeness. No effort required. But I know Lent is about conversion, and that's the best way, because it's not just about witnessing something external to us, however spectacular, but witnessing something internal within us, even deeply within us. So, if Lent is about conversion, about us coming closer to you, then, well, as you know, the first thing I thought on reading today's Gospel is, why is the Church showing us the Transfiguration? It only seems to make sense when we take a better look at the text. It's there that we discover, in the Apostles' experience of the Transfiguration, a certain reflection of our own experience with God. First, the Apostles are called up the mountain and find themselves in the midst of something divine, just the same way we begin the interior life and then discover ourselves in the middle of something divine. It's not spectacular, what we experience, not like seeing visions, but it's something that begins to come to life in our soul. Then the apostles are caught up in the moment and they want to stay there, so Peter offers to build tents for everyone. We would all too easily stay in one place in our interior life, but of course, God has other plans. Just the same as the next part of the story, where the apostles encounter the divine in a way that shows forth God's magnificence, we also find ourselves before God's magnificence. Now, perhaps we don't fear like the apostles, but we realize God's call is not to stay in one place, but to follow him, whatever that means. We know that following him means blessing, and we want it, but it's difficult, it's uncomfortable. This actually is what we see in the first reading, where Abraham is called to leave everything, his country, his family, his home, and to go with God, trusting in a greater blessing. Of course, God isn't calling us to pick up and leave everything. Our Lenten experience is different. The magnificence of God that makes the apostles afraid is for us the conviction before the magnificence of God's goodness that we need to change. We see Him, perfect and good, then we see ourselves, and we can't help but know that we should improve. That's the Lenten conversion that we're looking for. But it costs us, and that's where the next part comes in. The apostles cease being afraid when they find themselves alone with Jesus and hear Him telling them, "Get up and do not be afraid." Exactly the same for us. When we keep our eyes focused on Jesus Christ, we have no fear about change. We needn't ever fear our own imperfections and sins, our own need for conversion, because we see ourselves falling under the gaze of Jesus Christ. With Him, we understand fully that the call to conversion is Him leading us to our own good, helping us to receive a greater blessing. In that sense, yes, like Abraham, we get up and go. We only need to go forward one step at a time, keeping Jesus Christ firmly in our sights. And just being willing to take that one step can change everything. Years ago, I used to help out with some nuns in the Missionaries of Charity, that's Mother Teresa's order. And one of the nuns there had lived alongside Mother Teresa many years ago. And she told us at one stage, "You know, Mother used to tell us that all of this that you see here now," she was talking about all the houses for the dying and the spread of the Missionaries of Charity throughout the world, "all of this that you see here now wouldn't exist if I hadn't got up and helped the first dying person on the streets of Calcutta." And of course she's right. There had to be a first step. And we all too often think about the last steps, the end things, everything as it finishes. But in reality, the first steps are the ones that really matter. I mean, just think of that first step on the moon, for example. That first step on the moon was a spectacular one, but it wasn't actually the first step. That was the last step. That was the crown. The first step started years and years before. So Jesus, this Lent, we're most definitely asking you for conversion. Not for a complete conversion, as if we were going to make ourselves saints in just 40 days, but a conversion which is the grace of taking one step forward every day, with our eyes fixed on you, knowing that you are both keeping us company and guiding us. Sometimes we can even think that we have sins or failings which are too big, things that we can't change. And in fact, we're right. There are many things that we can't change, but that's not the case with God. You've probably often heard that there is no sin so great that God cannot forgive you. But have you ever thought that it's also true that there is no sin so great that God cannot change you? That's the confidence we want to foster this Lent. And even if we finish Lent without having found the conversion we were hoping for, but having found true hope in God, we would have lived Lent spectacularly well. It's the same confidence that we see the Church put to us in the second reading from today's Mass. There, St. Paul reminds his friend Timothy, and he also reminds us, that we need to rely on the power of God, who has saved us and called us to be holy, not because of anything we ourselves have done, but for His own purpose and by His own grace. This grace had already been granted to us in Christ Jesus before the beginning of time. We don't rely on ourselves, at least not on ourselves alone, but rather we rely on our efforts made effective by the power of God who has saved us and called us to be holy. That's exactly what St. Paul says, the power of God who has saved us and called us to be holy. And even more so, he emphasizes that this is a grace already granted to us in Christ Jesus before the beginning of time. Let's ask for that gift of Our Lady, who always draws us closer to Jesus. Our Mother, teach us not to fear conversion, but to trust in your divine Son. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations which you have communicated to me in this time of prayer. I ask your assistance in putting them into effect. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.